being sharp and focused, having the mind clear for things like your calls with your clients, for podcast interviews. That's really the main tool.
It's about the function of getting stuff done in the right order and so forth, which is there's no amount of supplementation that can make sure that you're doing the right things at the right time.
Shift your identity, upgrade your peer group, and then upgrade your standards for what you're willing to tolerate for yourself, from your clients, your offers.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So for those of you who've been following me for a while, you know that, all right, especially if you know me on a personal level, you'd almost argue that I'm the ADHD poster child. Got a lot of energy, and go in a million different directions. But as I've worked with thousands of founders and CEOs around the world, I've realized that this idea of focus is not unique to me. Something that many of us actually tend to struggle with. So when I thought about bringing on a guest for today, our guest wrote this book called The Magic of Focus. Just seems to really, really resonate. I'm excited to dive in a little bit more about this because she talks about focus in three different forms. There's the short-term focus, there's a long-term focus, and there's this selective focus. So I think all of us can benefit from a little bit more focus. So without further ado, The Magic of Focus author, Katie Stoddart, all the way from Sweden.
Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you for having me on the show. Really excited to dive into this today.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it too. So when I was a child, I was actually diagnosed as having one of the worst cases of learning disabilities that the doctor had ever seen. I was in the room with my back up against the wall. The doctor, my mom sitting on the couch, doctor's talking to her, and she says, "Your son has one of the worst cases of learning disabilities we had ever seen. In fact, I'm actually quite shocked that he can survive in a regular school system." I have multiple different forms of dyslexia. The only form of dyslexia that I don't have is seeing things backwards. But other than that, there's just many, many different forms. I didn't even know there was many forms of dyslexia, but apparently there is. I have ADHD, a severe ADHD, and a whole bunch of things. I've worked through my entire life balancing nutrition and sleep, just trying to make sure that I'm able to focus. One thing that I'll say is that while this might sound challenging, and on a personal level, it's something I wrestle with every day, but it also happens to be my greatest superpower. So if God came down and said, "This whole learning disability thing, I can take it away from you if you want," I'd be like, no, like, keep it. I love it. It's good. Just had to learn how to harness it. So, but your book on focus, I tend to find that most people that I talk with, and maybe it's just common among many entrepreneurs and founders, they tend to relate to what I said, maybe not as severe of learning disabilities like I have. I mean, when I come home and I still have my luggage, I'm proud of myself because, I've left it behind 6 times before and my mind just can wander. But most tend to have some form of like ADHD. Does the work that you do when you talk about the magic of focus, is this for, dare I say, normal people? Or is this for the crazy, unordinary, blissfully eccentric folks like many of the founders and CEOs that I talk with?
It's both, because even the normal people, like you say, that maybe aren't neurodivergent can learn these sort of unhealthy habits of focus because they're constantly distracted because of all the apps. And so even though they might have a more non-neurodivergent brain, they still end up in patterns that are similar to some of the ADHD entrepreneurs. One of the things I've realized is that perhaps it's because we have a slightly more neurodivergent brain and that we have all these ideas and all this excitement, that maybe entrepreneurs and founders aren't well fitted to be employees and then start their own businesses because they have too much creativity, too many ideas, and it just doesn't really fit within a role. So perhaps that's why most entrepreneurs, founders that I know have some form of neurodivergence.
Doug Brackman, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote the book Driven. One of the things that he shared with me is he said, you know, if you look at my brain, on the front side of my brain, it takes in a wide range of information. And so there's just so much information that it takes in all the time. But there's like this equal balance between the front and the back of the brain. And so because the front of my brain takes in so much information, my ability to execute is dimly lit in the back. And then those other folks that have an easy time to focus on the back of the brain is, you know, bright, and it's easy for them to then execute. With a lot of the work that you do, have you found something similar to what Doug has talked about?
You mean in terms of the
And how does that
balance? So if you have so much input, then it's harder to channel it and be focused. I think this is because there's only so many things we can do in one moment, generally only one thing very well. And if we're taking on too much information or too many ideas and stimulus, then we often end up in analysis paralysis where we can't decide where to place our focus. And we're too busy
oh my gosh,
analyzing all
true.
the ideas and inspiration and creativity. I often have those sort of moments. I'm sure you do too, Charles. And I need to like just write them all down and then go
Yep.
through it. And right now, what's the priority? Okay, all of these are fun ideas, but they can wait. This is kind of urgent, but it's a 2 minutes, 5 minute thing. I can do that after important tasks. Okay, there's really only one or two important things that need to be done here. But it takes practice because I think initially we just want to start with anything that catches our attention and feels maybe fun or rewarding or high dopamine on the moment.
You're right. You know, if my wife says she needs the garage cleaned and she says to me, "Hey, can you go clean the garage?" I'll stand out in the garage and I'll look at everything that needs to be cleaned, and I'll start to feel it in my chest, this overwhelm. And I'm like, I get to this point of I can't do it. And, you know, then I just come in the house and I'm like, oh, I'm too stressed out. I can't do this. I can't do this. And she's like, oh my gosh. So she'll go outside. She'll be like, you see this shelf? Yeah. She goes, can you just organize that shelf? Okay. And then I'll organize the shelf. And then she'll be like, can you do the next one? Yes. Can you do the next one? Yes. No problem. And I find the same thing happens in business. For many of us, we turn around and we look at it, and there's any number of marketing opportunities. Then there's operational, then there's sales, then there's client delivery. And what happens is, for most founders, they get up in the morning, they immediately open their cell phone, they get reactive to all that stimulus that comes in from emails, and then they've got their Slacks, and then they've got, you know, you name it. And they get to the point like I did inside of the garage where it was just, I'm so overwhelmed. They might work an 80-hour week, but at the end of every day, they put their head on the pillow and they still feel like they got nothing done.
Absolutely. This is exactly what I saw with a client of mine today who'd come out of a marketing mentoring session and had a list of 3, 4 items to do, but instantly felt really overwhelmed. Instantly felt like it wasn't manageable. The same feeling you had with the garage. And how can I actually execute on all of this? Even though the actual tasks weren't that time consuming, weren't that difficult, but they just felt really overwhelming in the scope. And then it's exactly what you said. It comes down to breaking it down, but also maybe seeing which parts of it feel easy, like which one can we start with that feels a bit lighter, and having a clear reason why we do it. Because often, if we're not really clear why it's important, for example, cleaning the garage, if it's not your own reason, but because your wife wants to do it, and then sometimes it can feel like, okay, well, the marketing mentor maybe told her to do these activities, but she didn't feel that she really wanted to do them or that it was necessary or important. Then, if the why is a bit weak, it can be hard to motivate ourselves to actually do all of these tasks, especially if they feel quite overwhelming.
No, I know there's multiple different ways for focus. You've got some people who have structure, and whether it's paper or software or whatnot, which I'd like to ask you more about that in a second. And then there's supplementation. I know that, you know, there's a lot of people who are on either Ritalin or Adderall, which I tried many, many years ago and I hated. I totally despised it, hated it. But I did hire somebody that got their degree in Chinese herbal medicine, and he's a longevity and a functional medicine expert. And he formulated this stuff for me. It's been over a year, called Founders Fuel. And this has radically changed my life in so many different ways from a supplementation standpoint. So Founders Fuel is great But then it's also like, now that I have that, I have that ability to zone in, it's about the function of getting stuff done and the right order and so forth, which is, there's no amount of supplementation that can make sure that you're doing the right things at the right time. So I guess first, before we even go get off the supplementation type of, have you looked into that? Is there any part of your focus work that you do? Is there different elements of supplementation that you recommend or you found more effective than others?
It comes back to what you were saying earlier, which is the fact that it's not just supplementation, but nutrition in general, and having really the basics in place. So really having strong focus is first and foremost physiological. So getting the right amount of sleep, doing exercise
Oh,
first
yeah.
thing in the morning, and eating healthily, and things like highly processed food or sugar obviously make focus a lot worse. So if we're
Yes.
working on being more focused and then we have cake as a break, our mind is going to be all foggy if we have a high carb
Oh,
lunch, right? So before supplementation, because I think sometimes what happens is like I can eat unhealthily, and if I just take these extra pills or supplements, I'll be able to focus. Versus actually looking, well, what are some of the things that I'm doing to my body, like being chronically sleep deprived or sitting the entire day or eating really processed meal that are hindering my focus that I can actually change. And often I feel that that's in terms of the physiological aspect, that is sufficient.
that's a great point. If I have a pizza at lunch, like just a half a pizza and just, and then if I were to have a soda, I'd be a bumbling idiot and worthless by the end of the day. It really does impact me massively. And so my diet has been extremely, extremely clean because I get paid in direct proportion of my ability to think. And if I violate some of my principles and I'm not thinking as clearly, I, my clients who just so happen to be some of the top, 6, 7, 8 figure entrepreneurs in the world, they're going to be pretty disappointed.
It's nice to meet someone that takes their nutrition as seriously as I do, because sometimes I think we live in a world where we value pleasure often a lot more than performance or efficiency. Maybe not in the high 7, 8 figure world of people, but the vast majority of people we know and the society is built around pleasure. And what I've found is that the short term pleasure, although of course the odd exception is fine, but I feel that it's really not worth it. And the more you get used to eating, like you said, a clean diet, or even taking care of your sleep or exercising, all of these things, I often get the impression that actually being healthy is as addictive, if not more addictive than being unhealthy, because you just don't want to feel crap. Basically, you want to feel
Yeah, you're
healthy
right.
and vital and happy and excited each day.
I'd imagine it's easier for you to eat healthy in Sweden than it is for us to eat healthy in America, though.
Probably, yes.
I have a client. We helped him grow his business from 950,000 over to now 66 million. And he said to me about 2 years ago, he said, "Do you realize that when you are over the age of 40 years old, it's more impressive for you to have six-pack abs than it is for you to have $1 million?" And I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, statistically speaking, apparently he looked it up. He goes, statistically speaking, more people have $1 million in the bank than they do with six-pack abs when they're over 40. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And then I started looking everywhere in the mall and everything, and I'm going, my gosh, it's true. And I think it might actually, I'm 48. So in many ways, I can actually see how it's easier to make money than it is to, because it's a lot of work. And you have to be able to say no to cake, as you mentioned earlier, and pizza. I mean, you could sneak it in here and there, but and then the exercise. I mean, it's a lot. So yeah, it's interesting.
Mm.
Now let's go before we get into like the functional stuff. What about tools? I know there's a lot out there. There's whether it's project management tools like Asana and Monday and ClickUp, and then there's uh, I mean, there's endless apps and you name it. Does any of those play into the work that you do? And how important is that?
I mean, tools have their use, right? So, I mean, it's great to track your projects, for example, in Asana, and to time block in your calendar, and to use Pomodoro when you need to focus and concentrate. But what I found is it's a lot more about how you manage your emotions than it is about having a bunch of tools. Because we often get distracted because, let's say you're going through your emails and you have one email that really upsets you. As you're seeing this, some part of your brain is trying to escape that emotion. And what happens is then you'll start to open either social media or your Slack, or maybe your proposal that you meant to write, in an attempt to mask that feeling. If you do that once during the day, nothing happens. But what happens if you do this hundreds of times? And we often feel
Mm,
like, okay, if I have the perfect setup, if I have my Asana and my time blocking, we can go into that. And I've tried and tested all the tools and Toggle to check how you track your time, all of these different things. They only work if you've developed the ability to single task and to manage your emotions when something comes up. So when something comes up that's really challenging or difficult or upsetting, or that makes you happy or makes you a bit nervous or uncomfortable or afraid, I mean, the list goes on and on. If you're not able to pause and sit with it and digest it and process it before you start the next thing, you're not going to be half as focused. How can you be focused if one of your clients gets really upset, or if this big deal you were hoping that would happen suddenly falls through? Or if you get a personal note from a friend just before going to work and they're canceling their visit to come and see you and you were super looking forward to it. All of these random things that happen all day, if we haven't learned to emotionally regulate, they're going to be background noise, and then we're not going to be able to give our full attention to whatever task, project, call, like you said, being sharp and focused, having the mind clear for things like your calls with your clients, for podcast interviews. That's really the main tool. I really feel that the emotional regulation, the ability to be fully present and to then single task, if you can do that, then implementing something like Asana will take you half an hour and you'll just roll with it and it'll help you to be structured. But that's not the hard part. That's the easy part. Finding a few tools to structure your projects, meetings, calendar really isn't that difficult.
Walk me through your habits. For your day today, did it start yesterday and planning for today? Did it start this morning? Like, walk me through how you plan to focus and be productive today.
Sure. So at the beginning of each week, I do a planning for the week. And then at the beginning,
Oh, Sunday night or Monday morning?
Friday evening, and then check in Monday morning. So Friday evening,
Okay.
I review the past week, sort of plan Monday the following week, and then check it on the Monday morning. Then at the start and the end of each day, I plan the day, and then I review it at the end of the day and plan the next day. So generally, the planning is super simple, super fast. I write three main outcomes I want in the day, one to three main outcomes. If it's a day filled with calls, then one is sufficient. And then start with the most important task without checking the emails. Of course, this is like ideal scenarios. There are days where if I have a call quite early, for instance, I might take half an hour, check my emails, jump on the call. But most mornings I block, do my most important task, then check my communications, and then have lunch, go for a walk, and then have all the calls in the afternoon. That's it, really. I mean, it's pretty simple. Morning planning, three main outcomes. Start with the most important task. Don't check any comms, only single task. Have a mini break, check comms, lunch walk, calls in the afternoons, breaks in between, wrap up at the end of the day, and fit in some smaller tasks in between, the most important one being in the morning. And then at the end of the week, review how that went
Mm,
and if I achieved all the main outcomes. I think part of the reason people struggle with focus or being very productive is they overplan. So they say, I'm going to do these 15 different things today or 20 things this
mm,
week. And I was definitely guilty of that when I started. And after a while, you just develop a sense of, okay, it takes me 2 to 4 hours to prepare a presentation, or it takes me an hour and a half to do this proposal, or it takes me 2 hours to write an article. And then you block in 2 hours with maybe a half an hour margin, and then it fits. And so my main goal isn't to do everything on my to-do list. My main goal is that the planning that I set for the day is realistic. So it's more looking backwards. What can I be sure I will do? And I will put that in the planning. And all the rest is maybe nice to have, or if a call suddenly gets canceled, or something in the backlog in Asana that I can do if I suddenly fit it in. But it's really about being realistic about what's actually achievable within a given day or week.
I always think I can do more than I actually do every day.
We can work on it, Charles.
So how do you stay in flow and then remove those distractions?
So that comes back to what I was saying about the emotional regulation. So if you're in a place where you're centered, you're calm, you don't check your emails or comms, and you do that most important task. If you're not multitasking or doing anything else, flow just happens after 10 minutes. It's also almost, I'd say it's almost impossible not to get into flow within the first 10, 20 minutes if you don't do anything else. And that means not open a web browser to check latest news, not quickly scroll through the phone and check WhatsApp. No, because as soon as we do that, we break out of flow. So for me, it's really just like super clear. First of all, I think what often happens is we're not really clear and we have 3, 4 ideas, like we said at the beginning, so many different thoughts. Okay, be really clear. Which one am I doing now? And in moments where my brain is really confused, I actually take a post-it and I write down on the post-it, like I'm working on this workshop, put it there, open the PowerPoint or the Word doc, whatever I need to like focus and work on. And then generally I put on classical music, put my headset on. I find music helps me to focus, not always classical, but quite often classical music, piano. And then that's it. And then just do that. And if I get stuck, which of course we do, especially if it's creative work, then I take a break. I walk around, drink some water, look, think, come back. Yeah.
There is a type of classical music, I can't remember the name offhand, but is supposed to actually do something, I think, with the alpha waves or something in your brain and really help. Do you remember the type of music it's called?
I can't remember the term, but there are specific wavelengths or music that can help you to get into that. But I find most classical piano, whatever, just sort of helps to quiet down the brain a bit and also is quite calming. I mean, that's why they put classical music in lounges or on a plane, or it is quite calming on the nervous system. And I find that I can focus and get into flow more easily when I have, yeah, music in the background.
Yeah, I agree with that. And actually, I also find yesterday was a great example. It was just, I was on a lot of calls and, it was just, then it was time for me to get some work done. And I could just feel that there was this resistance, like, oh, almost like I need a break. I've just been go, 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 and I need a break. The old me would have just been like, suck it up and try to get some work done. But the problem is my brain isn't thinking clearly and I'm tired. I'm dragging. So I decided I was just going to step outside, go for a quick, not even a long walk, just about a mile thereabouts, just a quick 1 mile walk, get some sunlight, breathe, think, come back. And then I was able to just boom, just get down and get a whole bunch of work done. So sometimes the easiest hack for more focus is just don't work for a little bit,
Yes,
you know?
yes, that is.
I,
I mean, most of the time I say that what you really need to be focused, pretty simple, right? You need high levels of energy. That's the sleep, nutrition, maybe socializing, a bit of fun from time to time. So high levels of energy, then clarity, be really clear what are you going to do? Because too many ideas. Then single task, just do that one thing, maybe with music if you want, and then breaks. I mean, that's all it is. And I often feel like what's difficult is the emotional management part. What's difficult is you're going to work and you're feeling a bit anxious about something in the afternoon presentation. So as soon as you arrive, you go and check your emails because you're anxious about it. And guess what? They've said something. Maybe they changed the time or they changed the format or they've canceled it. And suddenly you're thrown and you haven't even started to work. And that is the hard part. That's what stops us from being focused, because then when you open up whatever you were supposed to do that day, maybe it was something you needed to send to a client, your brain is still being like, oh, I can't believe they canceled the event and now they postponed it to next week. And that's going to be really challenging. And your brain is just processing all of that, but you're not allowing it the space to process it. But if instead we do
Mhm.
exactly what you said, which is why breaks is a huge part of focus, I 200% agree on this. And funny enough, it's one of the things that high achievers really struggle with, taking breaks. And I'm like,
I know you're right. Yeah.
why is it so hard to just take a break? But in that moment, for instance, where you had all these emotions, you were just like, right, I'm a bit messed in my head. I'm going to take a break. And what I started doing recently is the equivalent of journaling, but vocal. So I take out my phone, I record a vocal message, and I say, look, I'm a bit stressed out about this because dum, 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 dum. I'm wondering what the options are. Da, 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 da. Maybe I could do this. And after 5 minutes, 10 minutes, mini walk, processed it, clear again, I can go back to work. It started because I used to leave vocal messages to my best friend about these things. And at one point I thought, surely she doesn't want to hear the minutiae of my daily life with my business. And some of it is really not that interesting. And so I started just recording them as vocal messages because I realized I needed to release the energy, the pressure, the stress, sometimes the excitement. Sometimes it's just a really cool thing has come through and I'm super excited about it. And then I can't focus either, right? So then I also
Right.
need to process it. But yes, absolutely. Breaks, fundamentals, super high.
I'll actually do what you talked about just oftentimes I'll do that in the morning with AI, and I will tell AI the role that I want it to play. And I'll say, yeah, so I this morning is a great example. I'll say, based on everything you already know about my approach to mindset, I've got a million different things that are going on in my mind right now. Help me make some sense out of what's going on so that I could get my mindset right for the day. And it's like, okay, no problem. Let's go. And then I'll just go back and forth. And I actually have my custom instructions programmed to ask me up to 3 questions that I should be asking myself that I didn't in order to keep the conversation going. So I'll do that until I get to a point where I'm like, yes, that's exactly where I need to be. And then I'll end that conversation and I'll be dialed in.
Nice.
So yeah, I could be a geek like that, but it's fun.
But I think we need that sort of either back and forth or interaction or something. But it's like you said, just take a moment to process it. Whether it's chatting back and forth with AI, whether it's leaving vocal messages to yourself or to someone else, or journaling, or not doing any of those things, but walking around, thinking it through. We need to process some of these things. Not every day there's huge stuff. Sometimes it's just a 10-second breather of, "Ooh, that was a bit of a surprise." And then 2 seconds later we're fine. But some days it's bigger. And I think we often feel the focus, or often what I hear is a focus, the issue is because there's so many different distractions and there's so many different tools and people reaching out and messages. But all of these are only a problem if we stop and we check them. And we don't need to do that every 10 minutes, half an hour, or multiple times a day. We can have all our communication in, a few big slots and just go through all of it in one go. What's hard is because we get caught up in our own mind and preoccupations. And sometimes just something in the background from our personal life, for example, can be hindering us from being focused. And I think that once we're able to develop this ability of being calm, that's why I'm also a huge proponent of meditation and also breath work, because if we're able to do
Yes.
that, it helps a ton.
Meditation is so hard for me to start because I'm like, oh, I got so much going on. I don't have time for this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, but then I try to make it a habit and I'll just sit there and I'll close my eyes. And I'll be like, I'm just going to do it for a few minutes. And then by the time I get to about the 5th breath, I start slipping into it. And then then I really like it. And it helps to bring clarity. It cancels and filters out the noise and brings clarity in. Rarely, if ever, it's probably 100% of the time, because I can't think of an exception, I will be in a meditative state and I'll get a breakthrough moment, like an aha moment. And to the point where it's funny enough, in my meditation this morning, now people are going to think that I'm really frou-frou when I say what I'm about to say, but I'm like, feel like I'm channeling something when I go through this meditation through like my zone of genius, because I will sit there and I'll go on this meditation and I will come up with this like crazy breakthrough information. And it'll almost be like the first time I heard it. And I'll be like, oh my gosh, there's something that I'll be talking about at some point later, but I got this breakthrough about AI and the certain disruptions that are coming. And I had a conversation with somebody at OpenAI because I was like, here's what I'm seeing and here's what I'm feeling and here's what I believe to be true. Am I out of my mind? And she didn't even know what I was talking about. But then when I brought it up, validated it and was like, yes, this is exactly what is coming, but I didn't see that. And so it was like, but that wouldn't have come just normally. That came through a meditation.
Hmm.
So it's wild.
I'm not surprised. I mean, we connect, right? We connect with ourselves, we connect with our subconscious, we also connect with the world around us. And often we're too busy and we're too rushing all the time to pick up on these signals. And it's only when we slow down. And some people choose to see it, maybe you're processing it in the back of your mind and your subconscious mind. Other people choose to see it as this part of a whole and you're tapping into it. Doesn't really matter. Either way, when you meditate, when you slow down, you get all these insights, you get these epiphanies, you get these realizations because your whole nervous system is calming down, going to different brain waves in the brain. And yeah, so it helps both with epiphanies and it helps with focus during the day because your mind is overall calmer. And also, the other reason it helps a lot with focus is because it helps the metacognition. So it helps you to see your own thoughts. So if you're, for example, about to open that document and your mind goes, oh no, let me check whatever, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. But you see that because you have a practice of meditation, you can see your own thoughts, you hear your own thoughts. And as you're about to do that, you think, wait, no, I don't actually need to go on there now. I want to do that. And you can bring it back, right? And at the beginning, you only sort of realize halfway through, sort of 10 minutes later, you're like, why am I on LinkedIn again? Or what wasn't I supposed to do this thing?
Right.
But after a while, you start to catch it beforehand. Maybe not all the time, but more often than not, you'll be like, wait, no, I don't actually want to do that now. No, I actually don't want to interrupt myself or get out of it. And what I often realize is when I suddenly have the urge to do something else, if I've been doing deep work or deep focus for an hour or two, then I think, oh, this is my cue to take a break. So if I'm in the midst of preparing a keynote or something, and suddenly flow seems to go away, and I think, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. Can I just, often for me, it's check LinkedIn. And then I think, wait, why am I thinking this? How long has it been? Oh, typical 90 minutes generally, sometimes a bit more. I think, okay, I need a break. So I'm not saying I'm always hyper disciplined and don't check LinkedIn. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But at least know every time that happens, it's because I need a break. And it's much better if you don't use your break to check social media because that's just more information input and more stress onto the brain and more information overload.
I have noticed too that when it comes to like when I'm talking to different founders that are feeling burnt out and so forth, and have a very, very difficult time to focus, more often than not, it's because they're not operating in their zone of genius. They're doing things that they're stuck working in their business instead of on their business. Because when they're doing things that are aligned with their zone of genius, it doesn't actually feel like work and it's easy to get into this groove and get things done. But when they don't want to do it, whether it's, let's say, bookkeeping as a common example, like, they don't want to do it. It's painful or, commissions or whatever it might be. They'll procrastinate, they'll push things off because it just doesn't, it's not aligned with, it doesn't give them energy.
Yes, I see that too a lot. And I've spoken quite a bit also about working from your zone of genius. And I love The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks and that whole framework. And it's true. Burnout happens often either because we're not working from our zone of genius or because we're not getting the rewards that we think we should be. But generally that happens because we're not in our zone of genius, because when we do get the rewards. And or just from putting too much pressure on ourselves. So sometimes even if you're working in your zone of genius, but you're putting so much pressure and it never feels like enough. I also really like this framework, The Gap and the Gain by Dan Sullivan, where we're always focusing on the gap,
Yeah.
always on what's missing. And that's really draining. And it's part of the drive for most high achievers and successful business owners. There's still more, still more to achieve, still this gap. But I think we need to balance it out with, hey, how far have I come? And every so often, I do this random thing where I'll check the amount of podcasts I've done or check the amount of speaking gigs or coaching out to just like soothe my mind that like, okay, we've done a lot of stuff already. Like it's still good, right? Like there's still way
Yeah.
more, but we still already done a lot because otherwise this constant feeling of not enough, this constant feeling of drive and more and the arrival fallacy and that gap, that can also lead to burnout.
I got it. Now, I know we're pushing up against the clock. One of the questions that I like to ask my guests is, if you were to ask me a question on anything related to how to grow your business faster, more predictably, or less dependent on you, what would be that one question you would want to ask me?
What would be your go-to tool to assess the current bottleneck in the business?
Wow, that is a great question. Well, the bottleneck is almost always the CEO, so or the
What
founder,
they're doing
right?
as a CEO founder, I agree. But maybe something either in their behaviors or their skill set or their process. How would you be identify that?
So it's funny because we'll go through that a lot. That's usually I find three really common bottlenecks that founders are in. One bottleneck is what we call a setup trap, and that means that their entire business is built on word of mouth and referrals. And so that becomes one major trap because it's built, that's the founder's relationships, the founder's network, the founder's networking, and so forth. So that is one big trap. Another one is the sales trap. That means that the only way they can close deals if the founder's involved. So it's all very much founder led sales. And so that's another trap. And then the third one is the scale trap. And that scale trap is when the founder has to be involved in the operations, somehow feels obligated to be in every decision. There's a lot of guesswork. So everything is sort of just tied in between the founder's brain. All the founder doesn't necessarily let go or empower their team enough. So they have to sign off on client deliverables, or their complexity is so much so that the founder has to get involved in every project because it's so complex and not streamlined and so forth. And so, in terms of where's the bottleneck, we'll quickly assess through a line of a bunch of different questions to see the severity of which trap they're in and how deep they're into that trap. For most business owners that are doing, I'd say maybe 3 million and under, it's definitely 1 million and under, but it could be upwards of 3 million. It's the setup trap that tends to be most because everything is built on word of mouth and referrals. Once they're able to create more scalable marketing and sales strategies, then it's about getting them out of founder led sales. And then as they get out of founder led sales, it's about creating more scalability in their operations because they're stuck in the founder's trap and you just can't work yourself out of it because the more successful you are, then the more people and the more clients, but it just means that you're trying to get involved more and more and more and you get stuck and go deeper and deeper into it. Does that help answer your
Yes, very
question?
nice. Yes, thank you.
And now back to you. This is the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. So if there was one big tip that you could give our listeners of what it takes to take their business beyond seven figures, what would you say?
I'm sure this has been said many times before, but I would say shift your identity by surrounding yourself with a peer group that has the identity that you want to have as a higher level figure business owner. Because I think it's all on an identity level. If you don't see yourself as a sort of business owner that has that sort of capacity. So I'd say three things: shift your identity, upgrade your peer group, and then upgrade your standards for what you're willing to tolerate for yourself, from your clients, your offers, what's important for you, your diet, what you read, what you consume. If all your standards are high and your peer group is high and you shift your identity at the same time, it'll put the whole basis in place from a psychological perspective to get the business to a high level.
I love that. And I think that's really good. And the symptom to know if you need a change, I believe, is comfort. If you're comfortable, then you're in the wrong group, the wrong situation, because we should be comfortable with being uncomfortable. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, I'd say most of the time I felt totally sort of uncomfortable the whole time, but also kind of happy about it. Sort of in a happy
Right.
level of discomfort. It's a bit like when you're pushing on that run or having a challenging conversation with someone who is clearly more knowledgeable or more experienced and you're trying to keep up. So a sort of feeling of mildly out of your comfort zone all the time, but not so much that
Yeah.
it's a panic, but not so little that it's complacent. And I feel that that is how you make leaps. Yes, absolutely. Just being comfortable with the discomfort, almost craving that discomfort because it's such a fuel and excitement and a sign of growth. And yeah, you just chronic, constantly leveling up. So yeah, I would say craving that discomfort.
When you just look at life as a whole, right? If you look at the body, if you're not putting the body under some level of discomfort when you're weight training or running or whatever that is, the body becomes weak. Here in Florida, we get hurricanes quite often and the wind comes to blow, but the trees, unless it is a really, really, really bad hurricane, the trees, they don't topple over. But you take that same hurricane and you put it in the Northeast where I'm from, now all of a sudden it becomes a lot more disastrous because those trees aren't accustomed to those types of heavy winds. And so constantly putting yourself in this period of just, like you said, discomfort, not heavy discomfort, but mild discomfort. It makes you stronger. It makes you much more resilient and better overall as a person, a CEO, founder, and so forth. Love that. Now, people want to learn more about you and the work that you do. Where do we take them?
The best place to connect is on LinkedIn, Katie Stoddart. Also check out the podcast, The Focus Bee Show, where Charles is also going to be a guest. So you can check that out in a few weeks. And yes, on my website, katiestoddart.com. So really they are the best places. The LinkedIn, podcast, also YouTube, The Focus Bee, and my website. Yeah.
Awesome. And then you've got your
Yeah.
book, The Magic of
Yes.
Focus. And so is that
Yeah.
available on
Everywhere.
Amazon?
Yeah. Amazon,
Okay,
everywhere.
got it. Very cool. Fantastic. All right. Well, that wraps up today's episode of the Beyond Seven Figures podcast. And I don't remember, we've done several hundred episodes, and I don't remember if we've ever brought in a guest specifically about talking about focus. So this has been a big focus of mine, talking about focus and trying to manage this day after day and week after week, year after year, ever since I was a little kid. So I was really excited to speak with Katie. And we talked about so much between just the habits, food, nutrition, and different ways in which you can get yourself in the flow and stay in flow. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And do make sure that you check out her book, The Magic of Focus. Follow Katie Stoddart on LinkedIn and also her website, katiestoddart.com. This is Charles Godet with my new friend, Katie Stoddart, and I will see you in another episode.